All right, welcome to this explainer. Forget the romanticized Hollywood myths you've seen on the big screen, because today we're conducting a gritty, strictly analytical breakdown of the RMS Titanic's final moments. We're treating this as a high-stakes investigation. No myths, no legends, just the cold, hard evidence that's been waiting for us in the deep, abysmal blues of the North Atlantic.
CQD, this is Titanic. CQD, this is. That's the actual haunting final transmission sent out at 2:17 a.m. by Jack Phillips, the ship's telegraph operator, right into the deep, black void of the Atlantic Ocean. Literally 3 minutes after those frantic taps of Morse code echoed out into the night, the ship was gone.
Okay, let's dive into this. Why on earth did the largest moving object ever built fail in just 2 hours and 40 minutes? I mean, according to her builders, even in the absolute worst-case scenario, the Titanic was designed to stay afloat for 2 to 3 days. Yet this 46,000-ton engineering marvel foundered in a fraction of that time. To understand why, we have to look past the human drama and focus purely on the mechanics of failure.
Section 1. The Abyssal Crime Scene, a 12,000-foot-deep investigation. To really solve this, we have to look at the wreck site sitting 12,000 feet down, not as a tragic monument, but as a frozen abyssal crime scene. And remember, before it was a wreck, it was a 46,000-ton Leviathan. The Titanic itself is our last and frankly our most reliable surviving eyewitness. Human testimonies from 1912 were chaotic, they were conflicting, but the steel doesn't lie. We are going to strip away the lore to look at the cold, hard mechanics that doomed this vessel.
Moving to Section 2, the digital autopsy. 16 terabytes of evidence.
By freezing the wreck in time using 16 terabytes of deep-sea mapping data, researchers basically built a perfect digital twin of the ship. And the forensic simulations based on this twin yielded some truly startling data. The fatal collision didn't drag on. It lasted a mere 6.3 seconds, and it didn't rip a massive 300-foot gash in the hull like we always thought. Instead, the extreme pressure created a series of small, microscopic fractures and punctures. And get this, each one was no larger than an A4 sheet of paper.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. The metallurgy of failure, microscopic pathology.
So, to understand exactly how a mere 6.3-second strike sank an absolute behemoth, we need to zoom way in. Macro cinematography of a microscopic cross-section from a hull rivet reveals some pretty damning evidence. Metallurgists discovered that the Titanic's steel had a high ductile to brittle transition temperature. In simple terms, when exposed to the freezing, 0-degree waters of the North Atlantic, the metal totally lost its ability to bend or deform. Instead of absorbing the impact, the hull plates and rivets shattered like glass, a phenomenon known as brittle fracture.
So the absolutely crucial point here is 7%. The Titanic was held together by 3 million wrought iron rivets. Forensic analysis revealed that these rivets contained an elevated 7% of silicate slag. That's the glassy residue left behind after smelting. To put that into perspective, that is 3 times the allowable amount by today's modern standard.
When you look at the metallurgical data, it acts as a cold, hard forensic dossier. It proves the massive chemical vulnerabilities of the ship, high sulfur content, elevated slag, and an incredibly poor Charpy impact test result at freezing temperatures. The steel and the rivets were chemically predisposed to catastrophic failure the literal second they hit that sub-freezing water.
Which brings us to Section 4, Anatomy of a Fracture. The 1 square meter wound.
Now you might be wondering, how do microscopic failures translate into a massive macro-level structural collapse? We'll take the exfoliated head of a recovered bulkhead rivet, for example. Because the iron was so brittle from the cold and the high slag content, the high-impact loading of the iceberg scraping the hull didn't just bend the rivets, it completely sheared them off. The rivet heads literally popped off under the pressure, unzipping the seams of the ship's hull plates. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what that looked like. Following a different collision on Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, dozens of vacant holes were left where rivets simply popped out. When those seams unzipped on the Titanic, they allowed water to rush in. But incredibly, modern sonar mapping confirms that the total open area letting water into the Titanic was only about 1 single square meter.
Right, so how in the world does a total of 1 square meter of damage actually sink a colossal ship? It's all about the mathematical inevitability of the sinking. Picture this sequence in 3D. The small punctures flooded the first 6 compartments. The sheer weight of that water pitched the bow downward. And here is the fatal design flaw.
The supposedly watertight transverse bulkheads were only watertight horizontally. They actually had open tops. As the bow dipped, the dark waters simply spilled right over the tops of these walls into the next compartment, and the next, actively pulling the massive ship down into the abyss.
Section 5. The final transmissions. The cold math of sinking.
As the physical, structural collapse really started accelerating, so did the frantic human urgency inside the wireless room. 10 minutes after midnight, Captain Smith ordered the distress calls to begin. This very first call marked the terrifying realization that the unsinkable mathematical design had fundamentally failed. They were taking on water way faster than the pumps could ever handle.
By 1:30 a.m., the tone drastically changes. Reading these stark transmissions really reflects the sweeping, ghostly atmosphere of the dying ship. The water was rising, the bulkheads were failing, and the electrical power was actively fading as the ocean consumed the lower decks.
Sent at 2:10 a.m., this incredibly short message represents the exact moment the cold math reached its inevitable conclusion. The bow was entirely submerged, the stern was rising high into the air, and the ship's massive upper structure steel was beginning to disintegrate under forces it was absolutely never designed to withstand.
Finally, Section 6, a forensic resurrection, closing a century-old case.
Now, what's really interesting about all this is that for a century, the exact details of this disaster were basically shrouded in myth. But modern evidence provides physical proof of incredible human endurance. Digital scans from the deep reveal concave boilers and an open steam valve on the stern deck. This is forensic evidence that the ship's engineers stayed below in the dark, furiously shoveling coal to maintain steam pressure. They actively held back the chaos, keeping the electricity and the wireless telegraph running until the very, very final moments.
Right after the sinking, early official inquiries, like the 1912 Senate subcommittee documents, were really just chasing partial truths, totally clouded by trauma and corporate defense. But today, meticulous underwater archaeology and metallurgy have provided the ultimate unvarnished testimony.
Ultimately, the Titanic disaster wasn't some unavoidable act of God. It was a deadly intersection of brittle iron, microscopic slag, open-topped bulkheads, and sheer industrial overconfidence. As the physical wreck slowly dissolves into the ocean floor, we have to ask ourselves, what other lessons about our blind faith in technology are still waiting to be uncovered in the abyssal deep? Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.